Hello and welcome to your 5th podcast on a poem, and this one's all about Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. Now as you're listening to this, you might find it useful to have a copy of the Poetry Workpack for Summer 2, Part 2, which is now available on the school website. But if you don't have a copy of that, don't worry, you can make any notes on line paper as I go through. Don't forget, just pause this video at any time if you want to stop and make notes. Even if you wanted to watch it in instalments, that would work too. Okay, so step 1 is to read all about the context of the poem and learn that information, and then to learn about the writer's message. Now, before we start with the context about the poet himself, let's first of all answer the question, who is Ozymandias? Because I think it's important that we know this before we even start touching on the poem. So Ozymandias was another name given to Ramesses II, and he was an Egyptian pharaoh. We don't need to know this in loads of detail, we just need to know generally who he is. He was very famous for being a cruel and powerful leader. He was always in search of more land and more power, and that's who we're referring to when the poem talks about Ozymandias. So now moving on to some information about the poet himself, Percy Shelley. Shelley was born in 1792 and he died in 1822. This meant that he was alive during the Industrial Revolution. Now I know you probably already know what the Industrial Revolution is, but I'm just going to do a very quick recap. Our country's main industry before the Industrial Revolution would have been agriculture, that's farming. But during the Industrial Revolution, we started to make things, we started to manufacture things. So factories started popping up where things were being made, and obviously we made money by selling those things. But what that led to was quite a big rich and poor divide, because you had factory owners who obviously made money through the things that were produced, but they would pay their workers very low wages, sometimes not enough money for them to actually live. And you'd had a lot of people moving from the countryside into the city to come and find a job, with all these hopes and dreams of a better life and making more money. And when they got there, they were living in cramped conditions, sometimes more than one family in a house, and they were getting paid very low wages in factories to do jobs that sometimes were very dangerous, like climbing under machinery to get things where they could have been killed. So you got the rich people getting richer and richer and richer, and the poor people were getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And that was all happening in the Industrial Revolution. Now, Shelley was a romantic poet, and that meant, very generally speaking, that he loved nature and he hated power and corruption. So he hated the Industrial Revolution. All of the romantic poets didn't agree with it. They didn't agree that these people had more money and more power and some people were living in poverty. They thought we should all live in a more natural way and not be powered by greed and just trying to get more money all the time. Shelley actually wrote the poem Ozymandias as a competition with his friend. So what happened was they found out that a statue of Ramesses II, which is another name for Ozymandias as we know, was coming to the British Museum. And they had a competition to see who could write the best sonnet about the statue. And that's how the poem came to be. On another note, Shelley didn't like the king at the time, who was King George III. And King George III and Ozymandias had some things in common. So both of them wanted more land all the time. They were always trying to get more land, and both of them wanted more power. And they'd get involved in conflicts to try and make that happen. So some people say that this poem could be a metaphor. On the surface, obviously, it's just all about the statue of Ozymandias. But some people say that this statue could represent any human being trying to gain too much power, like King George III. And what the poem does is it reminds us that however much power we think we might have as human beings, nature has really got the power, and our power cannot last. So it could have even been written as a warning to King George, although King George might not have known that, but it warned you that no human power can possibly last forever. Next, we need to talk about Shelley's message. Why did he write this poem? What is it that he was trying to say? Which message was he trying to get across? And here's the message your teachers have come up with. We said Shelley perhaps wrote the poem as a critique of powerful rulers and organisations to highlight the fact that all human power is temporary. So when I'm talking about the word critique here, I mean he was criticising power-hungry people, factory owners, people like George III who wanted more and more power. And the poem lets us know that however powerful people think they are, or an organisation thinks it is, it will never last. The only true power that lasts is nature. Before we move on to step 2, which is reading the poem, Let me just quickly go through what happens in this poem with you. It's very, very simple. So in the poem, a traveller starts telling a story about a statue that he'd seen in the desert that was broken. And the statue was the statue of the once powerful leader, Ozymandias. But what's happened to that statue is, over time, it's been crumbled away by nature, and nothing out of the whole city that used to be there remains anymore. It's just a blank desert with a broken statue in the middle of it. Okay, so you might remember that step 2 has got 2 parts to it, but I'll take you through them one at a time. So the first part of step 2 is to read the poem twice. I'm just going to read it to you once today, as clearly as I can. But obviously, if you're revising for a poem at home, always read it a few times, more than twice if you can, because every time you read it, you'll get a little bit more out of it and you'll understand it a bit more. So I'll just read it to you now. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing besides remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. The next part of step 2 is all about looking for structural features. Now you've probably seen this before by now. This is our glossary of structural features. You've got a copy in your pack, and if you haven't got a pack, they're all on here and you can see them on this slide anyway. But basically, these are all the main structural features that can be found in a lot of the poems in the anthology. And what I want you to do now is just take a minute and have a look at this glossary and have a look at the poem and see if you can spot any structural features from this sheet that are used in the poem Ozymandias. Even if you just find one, that would be fantastic. And if you want to challenge yourself even further, just think to yourself, why has Shelley used that feature? What could he be symbolising by using it? What could he be trying to represent? What sort of ideas? So have a minute to look for those yourself now, and then I'll talk through a structural feature with you on the next bit. Okay, I'm only going to talk about one structural feature in Ozymandias, and then I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the form of the poem, because I think that might be better for you to write about if you're going to write about this poem. So the structural feature, you might have spotted this one yourself, is enjambment. There is a lot of enjambment used in this poem. And as we know, sometimes this use of enjambment, one sentence running into the next line, can make a poem sound quite out of control, free-flowing and out of control. So this enjambment could have been used by Shelley to symbolise the lack of power man has, because it sounds out of control, mankind's not got control. So even if we believe as mankind that we are powerful and that we have control over things, the structure of this poem, the free-flowing nature of it, reminds us that mankind is never really in control. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through the form of this poem, because I think there's quite a lot to say about Ozymandias in terms of form, and it can be really useful if you can get your head around it. When we talk about the form of a poem, we're just talking about sort of the overall structure and the pattern, because some poets keep to very strict rules. So let me tell you a little bit about Ozymandias, but I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. You can find out more about this if you're interested in it, and there's lots of resources on the internet about it, but I'm going to give you a very straightforward, simple version. So Shelley wrote Ozymandias as a Petrarchan sonnet. Now let me just show you what you usually get in a Petrarchan sonnet. A Petrarchan sonnet has got an octave, which are 8 lines, like that, followed by a sestet, which is 6 lines. So all the lines in the 8 rhyme bit will go together, because there'll be a rhyme scheme that joins it all together. Then all the lines in the 6 line part, they'll go together, and then it ends with a rhyming couplet. So that's 2 lines that rhyme with each other at the end. And that's what a Petrarchan sonnet usually looks like. So now we know all the rules for a Petrarchan sonnet, let's see how much Ozymandias follows these rules. So we know a Petrarchan sonnet's got an octave at the start, so 8 lines that should all connect with a rhyme scheme. And you can see that it does, it's got 8 lines that all go together at the start of the poem. You can see the rhyme here, land, sand, command. So that's our octave. So that rule has been followed by Shelley. Okay, then the next thing that a Petrarchan sonnet should have is a sestet straight after, which are 6 lines that all connect together. And again, we can see that he's used that. Here's our sestet now. So you've got appear and despair, they rhyme. You can see how all those lines connect together. So again, that rule has been conformed to. And then it should end with a rhyming couplet. So that's two lines that rhyme together, rhyme with each other. But there's no rhyming couplet at the end. So what Shelley's done is broken the rules at the end. So he's stuck to the rules of Petrarchan sonnet all the way through and then broken them at the end. So you've got to say to yourself, why has Shelley used Petrarchan sonnet form but then broken the rules at the end? What could he be symbolising by that? You might have your own thoughts on this, but one of the things that I would say about this is that maybe he's broken the rules to symbolise the idea that human power and control are temporary. They don't last forever, because it's very controlled keeping to the rules of a Petrarchan sonnet, but in the end it loses control and it stops following the rules. In the same way as human beings can't control everything, in the end their power over things doesn't last, it runs out, and only nature is in control after that. So perhaps that's something that you could say about the Petrarchan sonnet form. You might need to listen to this slide a few times to fully get your head around what I'm trying to say and come up with your own interpretations as well. Step 3 is to read the additional information on the poem and then answer the questions. So if you're revising for a poem at home and you've got the poetry pack, there'll be a page in the pack that says additional information, and it's just some extra information about the poem that you're studying. So for example, it could be some extra context information, it could be about language and language features in the poem, or it could just be some extra information about the poem itself. Now the extra information on Ozymandias is really easy and we've already touched on it, so I'll take you through it now and then I'll show you the questions that you can have a go at answering. So first of all, the first piece of information is just that the poem could have been written as a warning. So this poem could have been written as a warning for King George III. Notice that we said it could have been written. We don't know this for definite, but this is what some people say, that it may have been a warning for the king at the time. Like Ozymandias, King George was power obsessed and Shelley hated corrupt power. We already know that. The poem could have been used to warn him that human power doesn't last. So he might believe that he's powerful at the moment, but his power will never last. And then you might have noticed that Shelley set this poem in a foreign land, so there is no way that King George would think it's about him. But he might still take a warning from it, but he couldn't have accused Shelley of it being about him because it's set in a desert in a foreign land. The second piece of information is all about the power of nature. And when you look at this poem, you should be thinking about the power of nature, because this is something that you could easily write about for the poem Ozymandias. Now we know that Shelley was a romantic poet, which meant that he loved nature and he believed that nature was more powerful than mankind. In the poem we can see that even though Ozymandias believed himself to be completely powerful, everything that he'd created, his kingdom and the statue, has all been destroyed by nature over time. And it's not even like nature's come and had to hit it with a storm or something extreme. Nature's just gradually and effortlessly worn it away over time. So now none of his kingdom is left. So the poem really makes us think about how powerful nature is. Okay, so I've been through the additional information with you now, and these are the questions for you to have a go at answering. There is a copy of these questions in your pack, but you might just want to pause the video because you can see them very clearly on this screen and have a go at answering them on line paper. You will need the poem to help you answer these questions, but they should get you thinking about the additional information and just about the poem as a whole as well. And that's step 3. Step 4 is to complete the theme sheet for the poem. So if you've watched any of these videos before, or you've been working through your packs, you'll know how to do this by now. But basically, you'll have a table like this in your pack, and on the left-hand side, there's all different themes that could come up on the GCSE paper. So we've got themes like power, conflict, the power of nature, the power of man. And all you need to do is note down next to each theme how that theme could link to the poem Ozymandias. Now, I've done a couple for you just to get you started. So for example, for power, I've put, well, the poem shows us nature is more powerful than man. But I could also have put man's power is temporary, anything like that that fits with the poem. And then for loss, I've put Ozymandias has lost his power to nature. Now, if you haven't got a copy of the pack, you can just note down the themes, just copy them off this screen now, and next to it, just jot down how each of those themes could link to this poem. If there's a theme that you feel just doesn't link at all, just put a cross next to that one, but really try to push yourself to think how each theme could link. And that's step 4. Step 5 is to learn the top quotes for the poem and to learn the analysis and to test yourself until you know them really, really well. It's not enough just to learn the quotes and know them by heart. You need to be able to say things about the quotes as well. You need to think about which language features are in the quotes and what you could say about those. What do they represent? What do they symbolise? So don't just learn the quotes, learn the analysis as well. And that'll help you when you get into an exam. So in your pack, the top quotes come in a table form. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to go through all of the top quotes bit by bit so you can take notes as you listen. This is our first top quote. Half sunk, a shattered visage lies. So there's a picture. It's describing this quote. The face of the statue, the visage is the face, in the sand, buried in the sand, half covered. So first of all, we could say that this is a metaphor because the statue is a metaphor. It represents the power of man. And the fact that it's buried in the sand shows us that the power of man doesn't last. That's what this statue represents. The adjective shattered has connotations of something completely broken. If something's been shattered like a glass, you can't piece it back together. It's been completely destroyed. And this is what nature is able to do to man's power. That's what Shelley's telling us. It's saying nature doesn't just break man. If it wants to, it can break you into pieces where you're irreparable. And the word visage, although it means face, it can also mean something that isn't really there, like an image of something. So that word might have been used on a deeper level to symbolise that the power that Ozymandias thought he had wasn't really there. It was just an image of power. There was no real substance to it because the power of man cannot last. Here's our second key quote. So we've got, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing besides remains. So it's quite a long quote that, but let me just put it into context for you. So the first bit, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. They're the words written on the pedestal. You can see that on the picture. So on the bottom of the statue, that's what's written there. And then after that, it says, nothing besides remains. So what it's basically saying is that when the statue of Ozymandias was built, there was a whole kingdom around that statue. So it was almost like the statue was commanding people to look at all the great things that Ozymandias had made. But now there's nothing left anymore. There's just desert, the legs of a statue and the head on the floor. So let's have a look which language features we've got in this quote. First of all, it's juxtaposition, because it goes from extreme power, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair, to nothing besides remains. So you've got that juxtaposition between extreme power and nothing, which could illustrate that man's power is transitory, which means it's short-lived, it's temporary. Then we've got King of Kings, which is actually biblical allusion, because in the Bible, God is often referred to as King of Kings. So that shows us that Ozymandias and other people, because it represents more than just this king. The whole poem represents all corrupt power. People believe that they've got godlike power, that sometimes human beings can believe that they are as powerful as God. But then look what happens to him in the end. And lastly, we've got the imperative of, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. This imperative demonstrates the power and control that Ozymandias and any other powerful leaders like George III believe that they have. Okay, so there are language features for that quote. Our next key quote is taken from the end of the poem, and it says, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So it's describing the sand, it's describing it as lone and level, and boundless and bare. All those words are being used to describe the sand, which is obviously part of nature. So it's a fantastic quote to show the power of nature. Now the first language feature is quite a difficult one, and I'm going to say that it's juxtaposition, because we've got the word boundless, which is a very powerful word, because if something's boundless, it means it's infinite, it goes on forever. So it describes the sand as boundless, so therefore nature as boundless, infinite, but it also describes it as level, which juxtaposes, because level is sort of calm, it makes you think of something calm, something not a hair out of place. So it almost shows that nature can have this ultimate infinite power without even trying. That's what it sounds like. Nature just calmly takes all the power. So it's quite a complicated one, that, but it'd be clever if you could talk about that in an articulate way. You've also got sibilance. You can see it in the blue, the sands stretch far away. And the sibilance sounds like the sound of sand covering him up. And it almost makes nature sound like a predator, because that sort of a hissing sound like a snake. So it makes us fear nature a little bit. And then the adjective boundless has connotations of something limitless. So again, you could just talk about that alone and says it symbolises the idea that nature has just got this infinite power, much more powerful than man. While man's power is temporary and won't last, nature's power will go on forever. Okay, our last key quote is only a little one. It's just colossal wreck, which is describing the statue. So it describes the statue of Ozymandias, which is now in bits, as a colossal wreck. What a fantastic quote, because it's so little, but you can get so much out of it. So first of all, we've got the word colossal. Colossal's got connotations of something powerful and intimidating, something massive. It makes you think of a giant. So that's the power that Ozymandias believed he had, that he was powerful, that he was intimidating, he was almost giant-like. And then you've got the word wreck, which has got connotations of something weak, something that's decaying and it's crumbling away. So you've got an oxymoron there, which is obviously juxtaposition, but two words that juxtapose next to each other. And the oxymoron of colossal wreck symbolises the fact that nature's taken the power away. So it's taken this huge amount of power that Ozymandias believed he has and just reduced him to nothing, to decay. So again, it illustrates the magnificent power of nature and that nature is so much more powerful than man. So when you've spent some time revising those quotes, which you won't have been able to do yet if you're still watching this video, you need to go away, learn them, write them out, get people to test you on them, maybe put them on flashcards. When you feel confident that you might know those quotes off by heart, come back to this page in your pack or draw this table yourself and just write down as much as you can remember. So in the left-hand column, write the quotes down, each one that you can remember. Then on the right-hand column, write down the language features in each quote, but don't just write the language features, write what you could say about them as well. So if it's a metaphor, what does that metaphor represent? And fill in as much as you can. And if you find that table helpful, just draw some of your own and keep practicing, because it's a fantastic way to remember as much as you can just about those certain quotes that are really going to help you. And lastly, we've got step 6. So when you've watched this video, when you've revised for this poem and gone away and revised each little bit and you feel confident on it, put the poem away, make sure the video's not on, you've got no notes, and just have a go at answering these questions. But make sure you don't look at anything when you're doing them. You want to do it purely from memory and see how much you can remember. Have a go at answering each of these questions, and then when you've done that, the feedback book will be released onto the website and you can mark your own answers. And then you can always come back to this quiz in a few weeks' time and test yourself again, see how much you've remembered. And the best thing about it is, once you mark your answers, you can see any areas you still need to work on. Are there some quotes you're still a little bit unsure of? Can you go back and revise those? So use this as a gauge of where you're up to with learning this poem, and use it as a tool to decide what to do next. And that's step 6. Thanks for listening.